summer air is something so hard to describe. Air that clings to your skin, thick and hot, an uncomfortable embrace. Spring is buzzing, but summer is still. It forces you to cherish the moment you can at last dip your toes into cool water, or when the cicadas cease their music, or rip off your t-shirt and leap over sand that burns your feet, finally making it to the blue. I used to like the idea of being the kind of family that cooks eggs and bacon every morning for breakfast. I recall this as I eat my dry, milkless cereal, trying to keep the sound of the silver spoon on the china bowl at a low. Marnie is still asleep, and she'll yell out if she can hear the clink of the spoon or the crunch of the Cheerios against my teeth, depending on the mood she's in. I chew slowly, letting each piece dissolve slightly before biting down. A repetitive movement, a soothing rhythm. The sun glares in through the rusty brown window slits, and I can feel the heat of it begin to make my school socks stick to my feet. I wipe the sweat off my brow and look at the lousy brass table fan in disgust. It moves so slowly, it almost heats up the room. Listening to the tick of the fan, 4/4 time, pa, 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 pa. The jigsaw pieces of my father's face connect, and I am suddenly back, sitting with dangling legs on the chair that I now slouch at. I can't remember how his voice sounded, just that when he got angry, he reminded me of the big bad wolf. "Jill, we don't need air conditioning," he had said. "Davey, come on, Dar, we've got a daughter now, enough of this cheapness," Marnie had stated, her Brisbane accent thickening as she got noticeably more agitated. "If you want air conditioning, you can use your inheritance money. That woman would want you to use it on something useless." Looking back now, I see how this was clearly a jab at my late grandmother. But then, sitting on that big chair, brown eyes wide, the words I was hearing could have just as easily been in Danish. I had looked up at my mother, who was staring at her red toenails, her cheeks pink. I waited for a quick, high-pitched response, but Marnie was silent. "Oh, you fucking drunk," he had yelled. Big bad wolf. The bed in Marnie's room squeals, and her feet collide with the soft wooden floorboards. The walls are so thin I can hear her draping herself in her pink dressing gown. I sit up straighter as she walks into the room, hair curlers falling out of her crispy wine-red hair. Before saying a word to me, she picks up a cigarette, lights it and drops it into the couch. She flicks her ash onto the floor and leans her head against the neck of the chair, sighing and switching the ancient TV to her favourite mystery film, one that I have seen countless times, Marnie. My mother must see something that I don't in Tippi Hedren's infamous character, if she insists on going by the name. She thinks that Mum makes her seem old. She says that she has a young spirit. At night, sometimes when she's lying on the creaky, moth-eaten couch with a bottle of sherry, she tells me that if it weren't for me, she'd be far out of this shithole like my father is. Marnie says that she bets he's having a good old time with his shiny new car, shiny new wife, and shiny new children. And to him, we are just lost memories. little nothings that have and should be forgotten. I pull the front of my school dress out, letting slightly cooler air trickle down past my bra to my stomach. My fingers brush over the circular Terrigal High School patch above my breast. Marnie taps her cigarette against the side of the couch and looks up at me. I can see her bloodshot eyes scan past my mascara-laminated eyelashes to my nose and down my unironed uniform to my feet. Your socks are dirty, she says neutrally. But that sentence alone is enough to bring me back to a night we both remember. There had been a crash and a yell, and I had crept out of bed and stood in the doorway, the yellow hallway light hugging me. Marnie had tried to hold on to his sleeve, but he had ripped away. "Put that down!" Marnie had yelled, staring at the suitcase in his right hand. He had said nothing, which was oddly worse than the big bad wolf. "Everything in that bag is dirty. Who's gonna wash that? Fucking dirty socks!" Marnie sobbed as he walked out the door, slamming it behind him. She had continued to sob as we heard the car start and speed down the driveway. She had continued to sob as she walked past me in the hallway. In fact, for weeks afterwards, it seemed as if the only thing that could ease the tears was a bottle of sherry and a bit of Marnie mystery. I wasn't sure at the time exactly why she was crying, even when my dad didn't come back. I just knew not to say anything to her, to continue being invisible, lost. Perhaps I never quite left that state of in-between. Not seen, rarely heard, kind of floating in this space, kind of lost. I step out of my chair and walk to the door, letting it bang as I walk out. I can hear the sea sloshing in the distance as I stand on the front porch. I can feel the sweet, sticky summer. I can see the little house in which I live. I can smell the sweaty, dirty socks. Fucking dirty socks.
If you've lost something, look in the last place you remember having it. That phrase has been laboriously drilled into my head, uttered with exasperation every time a lunchbox, drink bottle, or sports top has gone missing. But if I remembered where I'd left it, then surely I wouldn't have lost it in the first place. Australia is a cornucopia of lost property. Immigrants and refugees trying to pave a way for a better life, and stolen generations who still haven't found their way back home. It's evident in our newly opened Arabic hipster cafes, our K-pop dance studios, the butter chicken packs gracing every Woolworths frozen food aisle. Australia's overflowing with bits and pieces of different cultures, my own family contributing to the abundance. But have you ever wondered what it was like being an after product of this mix and match? Being torn between two worlds, each trying to claim you as their own, only to leave you discarded and limp on the floor like a sock when they find that you don't quite fit in. Have you wondered what it's like growing up in Australia, being educated in Australia, speaking Australian, which I brazenly believe is its own vernacular separate from the English language, but still not looking Australian? People seeing your name and speaking different for you. For looking at your brown skin and not quite seeing the true blue underneath. I've always identified as Sri Lankan Australian. My family migrated in 2000. I now see that I got the best of both worlds, but it wasn't always like that. Like many others, I grew up speaking fluent English and Sinhalese, a boastful bilingual, but somewhere along the way, I decided it was uncool to call my parents Ammi and Tati in public, or perhaps it was decided for me. Some of my friends spoke French at home. We would pester them, pry them with Milo bars and other priceless recess snacks until they spoke a few words, but never would somebody ask me to speak Sinhalese for them. I lost the talent along the way. I was met with confused stares by some relatives when I adopted an almost overnight Australian accent, but I decided it was worth it. I understand Sinhala perfectly now, but when it comes to speaking it back, the words fall back down my throat. The same applies to my whole perception of my culture. I'll observe and applaud at various ceremonies and rituals, but if you ask me if my kids will get the same depth of experience, I would choke and say that I don't know if I could find it in me to give it to them. Visiting Sri Lanka for the first time changed everything. The warmth of the Colombo airport, not only contributed to by the humidity, engulfed me. And for the first time, I looked like I belonged. It was invigorating to look around and see everyone the same as you, to blend into the crowd and not be a splat of color in a wave of white. Maybe the initial excitement blinded me, but it still took me a few days to realize that people were still staring. At first, I didn't know why. I wondered if it were our giant luggage bags screaming tourists, or perhaps everyone thought our family exceptionally attractive. It wasn't until well through the first week that I realized it was me. I was a peculiarity. Somehow, they knew that I was the odd one out, a metaphorical wolf in sheep's clothing, though I doubt they were scared of me, just confused. In a sickeningly unfunny parallel, I felt just as out of place in Sri Lanka as I did in Australia. Though my relatives tried to be polite, they couldn't hide their mystification well enough. With my sister, they would talk for hours, unending, their conversation fluent and flowing like a river. But the hesitancy they approached me with spoke volumes, more than any stilted word uttered in Sinhalese or English ever could. The 13-hour flight back home gave me too much time to think. I was at a crossroads with my identity. Reflecting back on my trip and the wonderful sense of family and tradition evident in the warm greetings and the colorful homes and even the way too spicy meals made me realize just how much I've lost in my yearning for acceptance. Acceptance I had never really needed in the first place. There are over 1 million people in the country with the same story as me, who might feel as if they've been thrown in the lost and found box, waiting for someone to pick them out and claim them as their own. Who have been waiting for so long and fading until they can't remember where they came from. Who feel as if their identity is nothing more than lost property.
I stare at the counter, weighing up my options. 2 Redskins versus 1 packet of Hubba Bubba. The Hubba Bubba will last longer, but gum always makes me hungry. Finally making eye contact with the shop assistant, I walk toward the counter with a decisive step. Yes, she says, somewhat impatiently. I always come in at this time when I know she's working. She's in the year above me with long, shiny hair that reminds me of chocolate syrup. I try and steal glances at her when I think she's not looking, but I'm sure she's noticed by the bitter look she's giving me. Oh, 2 redskins, please. $2. I fumble through my bag, searching for the shine of gold. I hear her sigh as I remember my sweater. I left it in the pockets of my red sweater, the ugly red one I wear on sports days. It was my 16th birthday present from my mum. With it came a note saying, "I saw this and thought of you. Happy birthday." "Ha!" said my sister when she saw it. I have never liked it, but I wear it for Dad. He thinks if I wear it enough, she'll come back, but I think he's kidding himself. I wasn't too worried about the sweater. To me, it was like a homemade lunch, something you'll eat if need be, but wouldn't be upset if you accidentally, maybe on purpose, dropped it in the bin. But as I strolled home, blasting music through my headphones, a feeling resembling my stomach being pulled out through my throat started to creep in. This is the part of me I hate. Guilt. Even something as small as a lost sweater can make me feel like I've just robbed the bank and bought drugs with the money. Attempting to put my mind at ease, I head up the next street to make my way back to school. Walking to the pace of my music, I power ahead through the busy streets, hoping if I go fast enough, I can outrun my brain. The bustling businessmen are the thoughts in my mind, each pushing to get to the prime spot. If my life was an ice cream sundae, this would be the cherry on top. The last Jenga block pulled before the whole thing falls to pieces. The tears fog my eyes like clouds on a cold morning, but the feeling inside is more hot than cold. Anger prods me like the boy who sits behind me in class, who thinks it's funny to poke his pen into my back. I hate how she pops into my mind at the most unexpected times, but sometimes I'm just too tired to push her out. Little things, like a girl holding hands with her mother to cross the road, or a girl at school complaining about how involved her mother is with her life. It has been almost a year now since she left, but it feels like 10. The more I try to remember, the less I can distinguish between memory and made up. I feel like I was half asleep the whole time. Each small memory is like trying to make a picture out of the puzzle pieces found buried under the couch cushions. My dad, a chain-smoking zombie. My sister, a bear residing to her cave for hibernation. And my mum, stealer of hearts. The red roof of school peeps over the hill as I rush toward it. I burst through the doors and run to my locker. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a figure stagger towards me. Tim. I think this is... yes, I mean, thank you, I stammer, reaching for the sweater, brushing my fingers against the rough fabric, only to find it being whipped out of my reach. Ha ha, very funny. I always forget what dickheads the boys at my school can be. I'm mentally preparing to get back my sweater with just the right amount of appreciating the joke, which I don't at all, to not be labelled that bitch who can't take a joke, but also just enough seriousness to get my point across. I reach for the sweater with a forced ha as he, once again, hands me the sweater and snatches it away again. Nah, just joking, he says, after handing it to me, properly this time. He turns to walk away. As I stand alone in that hallway, feeling the sweater scratching at my sweaty hands, his broad back becomes the silhouette of my mum in that dark hallway, not even turning back to look as she softly closes the door behind her. Come back, I say softly, my voice bouncing off the high ceilings. Tim turns round. What? But I don't say anything. I'm already out that door, running down the street until I reach the milk bar. As I stare through the grimy window, the slam of a car door makes me jump. It's her. Her shift must be over. She climbs into a burnt orange Toyota, and before she can close the door properly, it speeds off. There's someone else behind the counter. But I've lost my appetite. Fumbling around in my bag, I find my earphones, plug them in, and walk away.
The bus ride was taking longer than I had thought. When I bought my first apartment after moving, I had found one near Christiania. But over the years, as I had moved and moved again, I'd drifted further away, leaving me where I was now, sitting in the 9A for an hour to get there. I'd been surprised by my reaction to the headline, Sigar Kassan labelled fire hazard to be demolished by local government. It wasn't clickbait designed to provoke outrage, yet it sent anger surging through me at the wrongness of it. Christiania was the place I went to as a lost teenager after moving out. Its independence had appealed to me as a place to find myself again. Its separation from the government a sign to my younger anarchist self, this is where your people are. So of course I was still attached to it. Nevertheless, I considered myself quite a rational person nowadays, which is why my reaction surprised me. The facts of the story were reasonable. The building was a hazard. Its demolition didn't mean the government was going to kick out people who had been squatting on their land for the last 30 years, or that it was going to destroy Copenhagen's top tourist attraction. They would go in, demolish the building, go out. Nothing disastrous. Yet I couldn't shake the unease that the headline had left inside me, that these things could happen. So here I was, on a bus to join the protest at the first place I had thought of as home. Perhaps to rediscover my roots, relive my youth a bit. It had been a long time since I'd thought about Christiania. But now that I missed it. The hulking warehouses, the once bland military barracks, now brightened with street art, the bizarre amateur-built buildings dotted along the waterfront. I hadn't seen any of that in years. But the thing I ached for the most was the life of it. Something was always happening in Christiania, nothing like the quiet, dreary suburb where I lived now. Maybe I could move back. Not for a long time, just for a break from the norm. I knew that something was wrong. As the bus drew closer, I could hear the muted sirens, see the orange flicker of flames playing on the buildings. And as I stepped off the bus, I could smell the mingled smoke and tear gas. Every instinct told me to turn away, that this wasn't the peaceful protest I was searching for, but I followed the tug in my guts instead, drifted towards the shouts. It wasn't far to the start of the action. I took a winding route to avoid the police barricades, but soon I was at the edge of the crowd of protesters. It was anarchy. A whoop went up in front of me as a pair of teenagers threw a sign onto the road fire. A Molotov cocktail arced over their heads and exploded just past the makeshift barricades that had been set up in front of the main entrance to Christiania. Police stumbled backwards, then hurled a canister of tear gas into the crowd of protesters. I watched numbly from a safe distance. "You going to join?" I shook my head. "Then why are you here?" I didn't know the man standing next to me. I didn't really know anyone around me. They were all decades younger than me, and I saw none of the people who had been pillars of the community when I lived here. Really, I shouldn't have been surprised. Everything changed. New people came and the meaning of a community shifted. But I could hardly process the scene of destruction that I was faced with. It was such a far cry from the Christiania I had known. Seeing the turmoil that had taken over a normally peaceful street, I silently repeated the man's question. Why am I here? I had come back because the thought of sitting back and watching from the sidelines as they demolished a part of my youth had seemed so utterly wrong. But now that initial righteous fury was a numb thing in the back of my mind as I saw Christiania around me, and yet not a shadow of my former home. The man was still looking at me, I realised, waiting for an answer. "I'm not sure," I replied. The correct reply would have been, actually, same reason as you, then to plunge into the conflict. But now that I was here, that felt like a lie. I wanted no part in this violence, whereas his eyes scanned the crowd in front of us eagerly. It seemed like he was more here for the anarchy than to protect a historic building.
He raised an eyebrow like my response was ridiculous, then said with his youthful arrogance, "Well, I guess you'd better find out." Like he'd never gone somewhere because of that tug in his gut and searched for the why as an afterthought. Someone further into the conflict shouted and waved at him, and I saw a smile, nervous yet thrilled, break across his face as he turned to go. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do. All the thoughts I'd been having of moving back here just minutes ago now seemed laughably naive. I had assumed that Christiania would be waiting for me exactly as I had left it. But hadn't I read the news reports? Hadn't I heard of the shootings? None of that bore any similarity to the place I had known. I had chosen to ignore it, to cling to the past and disregard the truth. I didn't belong here anymore. It had been mine once, but I had long since lost it to a more radical, violent faction that had overrun it. I didn't think I could support that. I turned away and started back towards the bus stop.